Hi, sound is a weird soup, and today we will try to build a kick sample, in probably the most impractical way you can think of. From the ground up, hand-picking sine waves. And I will try to explain every step to the best of my ability, so you not only have the tools, but also the understanding to build your own sample, exactly the way you imagine it. This is not the average tutorial where I give you some tools and let you play with them. I try to give you the understanding, so whatever you touch will become your tool. First, I will show you the mathematical basics, but hopefully in a way that everyone can understand them, even though it may look pretty complicated. Of course, you are free to skip them if you just want the soft facts, but I encourage you to spend those 10 minutes of your life to try to understand it. You might have heard that every sound wave can be represented by a bunch of sine waves, and that's partially true. Let me show you. There is this mathematical space, we call it the Fourier domain. If we take a signal from our real world, which is called the time domain, and give it a look inside the Fourier space, it gets disassembled into a bunch of perfect sine waves. For example, if we take this sound and look at the Fourier representation, we see there are two frequencies present. Thereby, we can go back into our time domain and take those frequencies, add them together, and we get our original signal. How exactly a Fourier transformation works is not important now. If you are interested, I linked you a video. For now, we just need to know the fact that every frequency that is present in our signal will also be shown in the Fourier domain. Now let's take a look at a wave that is able to change its amplitude instantly, like a sawtooth wave. Let's try to build it out of sine waves. Well, the Fourier domain tells us that we need a ton of different frequencies to build this wave. Mathematically, it are infinitely many. This is not a huge problem for digital audio, since it has a sample rate anyway, and therefore a maximum frequency in the Fourier domain. But it is a mathematical quirk to remind you that there are some waves which can't be simply built by adding sines, at least not in practice. So why did I tell you about this? Let us take a look at this kick sample. That looks nothing like a kick sample, but stay with me. It seems to have a very low frequency, it gets louder at the start and then quieter at the end, a simple short sound pulse. That sounds nothing like a kick. Well, this is obviously not a sine wave. A sine wave does not change its loudness. Every real wave packet can be represented as one or many frequencies which carry the tonal information, like the sine, and an envelope which tells us loudness and shape of that packet. Sometimes the envelope itself can form a new wave with its own frequency, like it is the case for beat frequencies, but usually it is just a blanket on top of the wave. So let's take a look into the Fourier domain to figure out which frequencies are present here. For our sine wave, we see the 60 Hz as expected, but if we look at our sound pulse, that's fascinating. There are more than just 60 Hz now. We also get some frequencies that are slightly lower and some slightly higher. Let's make the envelope a bit sharper. And we get even more frequencies. And we realize the faster our loudness changes, the more frequencies will appear. Let me show you something funny. If we take a really short one peak pulse, the spectrum becomes completely filled. But isn't a completely filled spectrum supposed to be just white noise? Well, yes, but no. This moment is your daily reminder that your average spectrometer lies. It only shows you the strength of each frequency, but not its phase. If that's what you would want it, you would need two curves. One for the sines and one for the cosines, or one for the frequency and one for the phase. In the case of white noise, the phase relation between the frequencies is completely random, but here it is not. If we start stacking our sines and deliberately match the phases in such a way that each sine has a peak exactly at the same position, we see that they obviously will add their amplitude at that specific point. But for every other point, they do sometimes point down or up, and on average, they will start to cancel each other out. And the more sines we use, the quieter and quieter everything else, except our peak gets. So yeah, short pulses will always contain a high amount of frequency information, and there's nothing you can change about that. And this is something you can hear. If we take a look at our two initial pulses, there's a subtle difference in the tonal information. The one with the sharper envelope seems slightly more rich, as a guitarist would say. And this goes for every change in amplitude. As soon as a wave changes its loudness, and change in loudness means obviously the start of a new tone, there are more new frequencies introduced that will show up in your spectrum analyzer. True sentence rant. As long as your plugin does actually perform a Fourier transformation or not some kind of weird voodoo, it is supposed to show you a bunch of frequencies, not only a single sharp line, which may be the carrier frequency. If it's not this bunch of frequencies, it would mean that your analyzer omits information. Rant over. Let's get back to building our kick sample. This is the same Gaussian pulse as before, but with 42 Hz now. I will show you all the code I use in Python, so you can follow the steps if you are inclined to do so. Everything is linked in the description. Also, my Fourier domain is now logarithmically scaled. This way we can see much higher frequencies without losing resolution in the low frequencies, and we are also able to depict a wider range in loudness. This means our y-axis is now scaled similar to decibels. We will shape our sine wave like a more realistic kick this time. I like to use this function as an envelope, so I can multiply it to the carrier wave and get my rough signal. We have a sharp incline at the front, which you would call attack, where A gives the steepness of the attack. Then a bit of a steady amplitude, which is given by S, and a soft fade out at the back, also known as decay, here described by D. Don't mind if you don't understand the formula, it's just for the math cracks that may be interested. For everyone else, the shape is actually what is important. The math behind this is just a way too complicated way to write it. Now, if we use 42 Hz as our carrier frequency, it sounds like this. And to be fair, it's kinda meh. It just sounds dull and won't cut through any mix. More like a bass than a kick, to be honest. First, there's just a single frequency, which makes it even more bass-like, so let's tackle this first. We will sweep the frequency over the length of the sample, so that we won't be able to distinguish it as one clear pitch. So let's just change it linearly with time, so we start at 42 Hz and go down to 23 Hz, which is a nice number and a prime, and there are no important ratios between them, so the average brain shouldn't try to fit a note on this kick anymore. We can see that the peak in the Fourier domain becomes less sharp, which corresponds to our expectations, since the frequency is not constant anymore. We are already less boomy, and while this may not seem like a huge difference in isolation, if we would put this in the context of a bass, we wouldn't have to worry that our kick and bass are sometimes in tune and sometimes not. Now they will always be just out of tune. In our next steps we will use this plane sample to build upon. Secondly, it's been a very long second. Despite the sharp incline, we will need a few more frequencies to give our sample some punch. When a wheel pedal hits the felt of a kick drum, the impact will create a bunch of frequencies at the beginning, before the resonance of the drum takes over. So let's try to add this bunch of frequencies to it. For now, we want these high frequencies only in the beginning, not as long as a full sample. So we make a different, shorter and sharper envelope, and we will fill it with all the frequencies from 100 to 10k. Add them together, normalize them, and oh right, if we simply stack all those frequencies, we will get only a short pulse at the start, exactly the same way we saw earlier. This time the pulse has its peak at 0 and we see only some of those side wobbles. This does neither fit into the envelope, nor does our analyzer even remotely show the frequencies we just added. All this due to the fact that they are stacking weirdly, and the envelope cuts off all the information of most frequencies before they could even independently appear in our signal. Well, either way, let's add it with 5% to our plain signal and give it a listen. Yeah, as expected. It does not even seem particularly punchy. So let's change the phase for each frequency. Like, add the value of the frequency as the phase, so every sine wave from each frequency doesn't start at the same position. This also sucks. Just another kind of cling. So maybe use a few less frequencies. This way they should not cancel out, but we still have more high-end information. Like, we only use every 100th Hertz. This sucks. Now the ping at the start is rather squeaking. We are running into the problem that our brain is smarter than we like it to be. Since the frequencies are sampled by a simple pattern, we will always get some weird relations between them, and our brain will interpret this as tonal information. But a kick is not supposed to have tonal information. So, we have to change the phase for each sample, but in a somewhat random way. Let's take the Fibonacci sequence for example. There's no pi hidden inside that we have to worry about, therefore it should shift each wave for some kind of a random amount. This seems to work. No more tonal information, just something one could call white noise. This white noise has every single frequency at the same loudness though, at least in the code. But why does our Fourier transform show different amplitudes for each frequency? That's because of the envelope. Technically we could work with this kind of white noise, but a better noise, in my opinion, is noise that contains different frequencies at different amplitudes, not only because there is an envelope. If we want to randomize the amplitude of each frequency, we can't use a simple pattern though, since our brain would immediately spot it and give it tonal information, just like before, where we picked just a selection of frequencies. On the other hand, I am not a fan of true random sampling. With true random, I mean randomness that is not reproducible. Because when I put hours into crafting a sound, I do not want it to turn out bad in every 100th sample just by chance. Therefore, we need an algorithm or formula which mimics randomness, and everything modulo related is perfect for this. The modulo function divides two numbers into a whole number and gives you the remainder as output. So it is completely mathematically reproducible, but not easily predictable by our brain or ears. The smart guys among us can write into the comments where the modulo was hidden when the Fibonacci sequence was used for the phase. Here we will use this lemma random number generator. It is a pretty neat and simple formula if we use a huge prime for m and an element of high multiplicative order for a. You do not have to worry about the math behind, I linked you a video. We just seed it with an x of 10 for example, and we get random numbers we can use as our amplitudes. After adding all those signs, we normalize them and add them to our kick. And if we listen to the sample, there's nothing tonal inside this punch anymore. So it would be good if it sounded like a kick punch. So maybe let's shape it a little bit more. First, we use a random number generator to add a bit of low frequency information in the range from 10 to 150 Hz. Again, we normalize it and add a low amount of 30% of the initial amplitude to our plain kick sample. I would consider this a usable kick already. For my taste, I would also add a bit of high end too. give it an even shorter envelope, and calculate some noise in the range from 1 kHz to 10 kHz. Scale it down to a bound 0.03% of our sample loudness, add it to our previous signal, and take a listen. Yeah, I could see myself using this. Now a little more lo-fi chisel for the final touch. We take a very long envelope like our plain sample but filled with noise, scale it down to a little 0.01% and yeah, I'm happy with that. I think we built a nice simple usable kick drum. So I want to make some notes. First off, our sample has to be listened to in the context of a mix. Now our kick may sound like it has way too much high end, but in the context of other instruments, where there is much more information up there, the kick will seem much more toned down and you may even consider adding more high end. Secondly, this sample is also kind of long. If you have some fast kick patterns, you should shorten them in a way that the sustained envelopes do not overlap, or at least not too much. At least the punchy high frequency amount of the kick has to be short enough to fade out before the next kick comes in. You do you. For most people this is definitely not the easiest method to build a kick sample. But I hope I could give you a bit more of a feeling how much thought and intention such a short sample can contain, and how the waves inside it are stacking and combining to finally become the sound that your brain makes it to be. Everything around us is in some way made of waves, and for me, I think it is always an advantage to understand what I am doing. I hope I could share some of this with you. Keep your ears curious, and till next time.